Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live event on the new European Pact on Migration and Asylum. This discussion is organized in partnership with Pulse, a European collaborative network we are proud partners of. So thank you all for joining, and we'd also like to warmly thank Voxeurop donors and shareholders for their support. It enables us to keep hosting such events and keep translating and publishing quality journalism, thorough investigations, and great cartoons. And last but not least, this support allows us to stay independent. My name is Adrian Burtin. I'm a journalist at Voxeurop. I'm in charge of topics regarding migration, and I am currently based in Tours in France.
Hi, I am Catherine André. I'm the editorial director and co-founder of Voxeurop, and I'm today based in Paris. The Pact on Migration and Asylum, which was adopted in 2024, became fully applicable on 12 June. This set of 10 legislative texts will profoundly change the EU's migration policies, including how it processes asylum applications and manages borders. For some, it's a much-needed update. However, some human rights advocates describe this set of new rules as an erosion of individual freedoms. Let me introduce now our three guests today. We are very pleased to welcome Lola García-Ajofrín, Daniela Ionita, and Silvia Carta. Lola, you're a Spanish journalist working for El Confidencial, where you produce cross-border reporting as part of the Pulse Consortium. Daniela, you're a freelance journalist writing regularly for obesity and an expert in citizenship, statelessness, and refugee rights. Silvia, you're an advocacy officer at PICUM, an NGO promoting the human rights of undocumented migrants in Europe.
What is your main feeling about the new pact? What is the thing that stuck with you regarding it?
I think it's a security-focused approach. If you look at the paper, the word security appears many times more than human rights, as some organizations fear. I would say that now we have to see how it's going to actually implement it.
For me, the thing is really related to the humanization of the people on the move, their bodies and the souls. And this punitive system is winning, related to the fact that before now was a kind of a protection-based approach, and now we are shifting to this punitive system where the lives doesn't matter.
Silvia, as an advocacy officer, what do you see in this pact?
Yeah, I think we're certainly very sad to see it entering into force, especially after it was presented as the solution, the silver bullet to solve all issues relating to protection and migration. But one thing that really stuck with me is that, again, many people perceive this as an instrument to, again, address migration, but it's actually an instrument targeting specifically asylum and really return and deportation. So I think the conversation sometimes is a bit not centered on the real issue.
Now, what are the main changes that this new pact is introducing to European law? So maybe, Silvia, do you want to carry on?
Of course. I mean, as you said, it's a huge body of legislation. There are several regulations and a directive that are part of the pact, so it's impossible to list all the changes, but maybe the most striking things, which are also considered some of the priorities in the implementation, I would say, are really these new procedures, both the screening of new arrivals, but also these new border accelerated procedures that are relatively new, or at least it's new the way that they will be used, and that will have an effect of, first of all, channeling people more directly in a binary, let's say, scenario, so either asylum or return, and also increase containment of people, detention, be it at borders, but also within the territory, under this new concept, if we want to think of EU law, which is this fiction of non-entry that basically sees people who are physically present in the EU as not juridically present. So people who are there, who should be and are under the jurisdiction of member states, are not considered having entered, which facilitates their potential expulsion at a later stage. So I think this is really one element that is quite striking in terms of novelties.
Okay, thank you. And Daniela?
I will also add that the fact that the pact strengthens the return system and the further institutionalization and the cooperation with third countries. And this, of course, includes the emphasis on deportations, the externalization policies and security policies, and the arrangements that aimed at preventing the arrivals before people reach European territory. But especially these new pacts that we're gonna see with the so-called third countries that we will gonna see are also countries from where specific people on the move are also trying to migrate from those countries. And the paradoxal situation will be this one, no? Like future possible countries like Egypt will gonna be most probably countries where Europe will gonna start having agreements on this fact. And this is something that we need to reflect on, because the same countries from where the people are moving will gonna start to be also countries where they will be sent back.
Yeah, I totally agree with Daniela said about this idea of the third countries. And it's interesting because it's something that, if you remember when UK initiated this idea with Rwanda, or later Meloni with Albania, there was this idea that the third country is something that is against human rights. So now it's on the table with this narrative of deterrence. But one of the points that I would like to add also, that some organizations said that in paper would help in some of the procedure, is that the parties say that the decisions are going to be faster, but also the returns are going to be faster. According to the paper, a screening must be completed within 7 days at external borders and 3 days within member states. And regarding returns, the entire procedure, including returns, it can last only 12 weeks. It means 3 months. So if you remember, recently in Poland, for instance, 3 Afghan guys were deported and they spent several months in detention.
What unforeseen or underreported issues could the EU come across with this new pact? Something that they haven't really given the time to think about.
Maybe I can give it a start. But this is something we've really been trying to flag since the beginning, but that this still remains something which is not part of the discussion, which is basically that it's really not feasible to consider everyone who doesn't get international protection, so asylum, in the EU, to be deported. So there is not only deportations as an option, but there are people that, first of all, for barriers that do not depend from their will or other considerations relating to human rights or their, social family ties in the countries, would make sense to regularize rather than to put into return procedures. And the pact actually makes it more difficult for people to access other permits, other forms of regularization, which are not asylum. First of all, because it mandates issuing a return decision as soon as the person's basically asylum application is rejected. Then because it creates these new accelerated return border procedures where people might be channeled even before they are able to formally set foot in the EU territory, because they might be indeed contained in centers or detention. And then, of course, because it does not even mention the possibility for member states to grant such permits. And there are a lot of possibilities existing at national level for health reasons, for family reasons, for the rights of children. And I think it's really a pity that this has not been considered or promoted as a way to really, let's say, manage the reality of the situation and not only the political dimension.
Yeah, so they're only like taking one, let's say, specific case or idea of migration and permits that they have, and they fail to consider the other possibilities that migrants do have to find regularization.
Yeah, of course. I think this EU Pact doesn't think about also the extreme administrative complexity in each country. Many member states already struggle with existing frameworks and may lack the infrastructure to build the required screenings and the detention and the monitoring system on a short notice. And we know that in Italy, we know that in Greece, and of course, I hope that there will be massive litigation actions from NGOs and lawyers related to all the side of the pact regarding the detention and the rights of the children and the families and the procedural fairness that, of course, as Silvia already mentioned, cannot be fair. And yeah, of course, these extensive legal challenges will take action in every country in different time, and will be very interesting to see how fast the administration will gonna work on the territory, and we will gonna see how much also there will be a transparent and accountable. And we have some expectations, and we know that most probably this transparency and accountability will show us a lot of gaps.
Yes, this is a very good point that you raised, since in Belgium, where I am usually based, it's like a huge problem. And we know that if you put this system under strain, you have, as you say, lack of accountability, lack of fairness that happens. It's a problem that so far many governments around Europe have a very hard time to address. Lola, do you want to add something?
And I would like to add also, in the case of disagreements with third countries, how we are going to guarantee accountability of these countries. But also, I'm thinking in the case of Afghanistan, where Brussels announced that probably they are going to meet some Taliban members in Brussels to have these deportations. How really we are able to have some accountability of this? So in the moment they are in the other country, we forget about that, or how it's going to work.
Thank you, Lola. On the 26th of March, the European Parliament voted in favor of allowing refused asylum seekers to be sent to return hubs in third countries, backed by the far right. How would it work?
We saw it in the case of, for instance, with Italy and Albania. So the idea is that if there is not agreement between the EU country and the country where this person is coming from, they can wait there until the procedure is finished. It's also seen, and this is one of the ideas that we put on the table, in a way, we are forgetting that we are talking about people with family, with dreams. If we are traveling to France because you have your brother living there, and we are sending this person to Albania because we don't really understand that it's a person with a family who really wants you to go to France. So it's the whole idea just to put in people like numbers and forgetting about the problem is going to be very inhuman somehow.
Yeah, of course, we already mentioned different things related to the accountability, but what will happen will be a lot of legal black holes. And as civil society, we will definitely need a new system also for us to have the possibility to monitor all the third countries, monitor the situation, and again now go on the fact that we are speaking about people, single experiences, and single lives that are pushed away from this new EU Pact, but from this new Europe, because definitely this EU Pact will shape, and it's already shaping a new Europe where the bodies and the lives and experiences and souls doesn't matter in borders, and security is more important.
And maybe just to complement what the others have said, and to also go back to the question of how would it work. I mean, as you were saying, this new regulation, which is about to be adopted and it's supposed to complement the pact, is opening the doors to the establishment of return hubs, but it's actually way broader than that, in the sense that maybe a return hub makes us think about a center, a physical location in a third country where people will be sent. But the actual legislation opens the door for something even broader than that, because it talks about agreements or even arrangements, meaning like not legal forms of cooperation with third countries. And that could really look like different things according to the kind of negotiations that the member states will undertake with the potential countries that are willing to take these people. We might really have a plethora of different options, let's call them like that. Italy-Albania is an example where Italy kept jurisdiction over the people in Albania because they were held in detention. But this regulation also allows to potentially hand over the person to a third country, so to even relinquish responsibility on that person. And that's, of course, something that opens up a lot of questions from a legal perspective, from a human rights perspective. And it's very difficult to see how this cooperation will actually take form. I think we will only be able to test that once the member states start putting it in place. But I hope it's going to be difficult, of course, and there will be legal challenges.
Yes, thank you. Yes, as of now, we are like seeing the first developments of this kind of systems. But yes, we need to see more broadly how it evolves, because there are like still many blind spots, I believe. So still talking about the return directive and talking about this return hubs issue. This is, as you said, a huge setback for human rights. What are the consequences and the possible risks for asylum seekers? Silvia, since you're advocacy officer, I believe that you are quite aware of these risks.
Yeah, so let's say when we talk about asylum seekers, we talk about people still in the asylum procedure. So if we look at that group per se, I would say that the risk is mainly deterrence, in the sense that when they're still in the EU, they're already potentially kind of threatened with the possibility that if their case is rejected, they will have to return and potentially be sent to these countries. But I would say the main consequences for people, again, either whose asylum claim has been rejected or people who don't apply for asylum and are irregular in Europe for other reasons. And in general, the question is, well, first of all, whether their asylum application for those rejected has been handled with the sufficient care, sufficient, in-depth examination of the individual case, because that's a big question when it comes to the pact. And for the other people, whether and how deportation has been considered, let's say, compatible with their personal situation, because we know that international law prohibits to send people to any country where they would be at risk. And it's very difficult to see how this could happen in countries they have never set foot in, where they are just sent because of political convenience. So I think that's really the question. We are looking at cooperation with countries of very different sorts, with very different human rights records. And even if on paper rights should be respected, it's honestly very difficult to see how this would happen in practice. And maybe just one additional reflection, in the sense that what we see, is that really there is a kind of delegation of responsibility from the EU, which has certain standards set in legislation, set by our values, and so on and so forth, to countries that are not bound by the same standards. So whatever the minimum guarantees that they could give, it will still be a form of discrimination for the people sent there, as compared to people who have their case fully processed or anyway will be able to remain in the EU.
Thank you. This is something we often forget, is that the EU legislation could be at odds with the legislations in these third countries, and which creates a huge problem. Daniela, do you have something to mention as well?
I think Silvia was very clear, and of course, is also the failure to identify the vulnerability, because again, this fast procedure, of course, will not give the time and the space for the people that just arrived after a long migration and exhausting migration route. In the moment when they will arrive, they have very few moments, few days, few hours sometimes to speak about what happened. The survivors of torture, the trafficking victims, and the individuals with the severe and mental health conditions. We know that they are always at risk, but during this fast-track procedure, I really think they will not have a proper identification. And there will be, of course, a psychological devastation that prolong also the legal uncertainty, but also the mental and physically uncertainty of the people that we have to remember that if they are crossing the Mediterranean or crossing the Balkans, it means that they cannot enter in other legal ways. So it means that they are experiencing a very difficult situation to arrive in Italy, in Europe. Sorry. This, of course, this EU pact again will inflict more severe trauma, and will happen more and more also for children and families and people that before maybe could be identified as vulnerable. With this fast track, this will not happen in the same way.
We are working with our members because PICUM is a network of national organizations to actually try to figure out how things are organized in the member states. And the first reports that have also been confirmed by other civil society organizations is that some member states are actually assigning to border police and border guards the responsibility to do this vulnerability screening and conduct this initial procedure. So that's really, per se, I would say, an element of concern that is very unlikely to be staff which is properly trained, as Lola was saying. But unfortunately, there is still a real lack of transparency about how member states are doing things. They're mainly communicating to the European Commission, which is not being that upfront with information, let's say. So it's really either through people observing on the ground at national level, or there is really little transparency, which is, of course, a pity in terms of journalistic or even democratic scrutiny.
Following up to what all of you actually said about the consequences of the fast track processes with families being torn apart and children being allowed to be detained as well. So how can such provisions actually comply with the European law and national laws?
Sorry, I'm always very legalistic, but one thing which is embedded in EU fundamental rights, the pact, and even this new return regulation is the principle of the best interest of the child, which should always be the primary consideration for any sort of procedure involving children, be it asylum, be it return, be it anything that relates to people who are under the age of 18. Unfortunately, what we see is that in practice, it's only formal compliance with this principle, because the fact itself that children can still be detained, for example, or that children could be sent to countries where they, again, have never set foot, cannot really be in compliance. There are international standards, there are committees at UN level that are repeating this since several years. There is also an international commitment when there was a global compact on migration from most of the EU member states to work towards ending child detention. But then what we see is actually the opposite. And maybe also a good occasion to flag that just today there was a letter from over 50 UN human rights experts and mandates that actually denounced the risks for children in the new return regulation ahead of the vote. I can be posted in the chat because I think it's really a testimony to what the EU is doing and the direction it's taking. And now this is departing from all the international standards, especially when it comes to children.
I just want to quickly to add also the fact that what is written is that they want to lower the biometric tracking to age 6. And this is also the proof of the fact that children are already considered and will be much more considered into this surveillance and security point of view. It's very traumatic for a child at age of 6 to be tracked. Maybe this child will not understand what is happening, but years after, no, this is clear, because in the moment when you want to track a child, it means that you want to associate this child to a specific and potential periculosity, no? And this is the thing. This is the fact that it's not just about this. It's also about the introduction of broader control powers, including the measures that may facilitate the checks in the private spaces, the collaborations with public spaces like schools and hospitals, to track the people that are not regular on the territory. And of course, this is very similar to what is happening in United States with models like ICE.
Yeah, just to add how we're very easy condemn what is happening with ICE in the US. But yeah, we don't have all these open eyes also for seeing what is happening here in practice and how this narrative is winning, that this is the importance in how some things that we considered impossible some years ago now is winning this space. And I think we should be worried with that.
Thank you. I am going to take one question that was posted in the chat by Robin Wilson. So first of all, thank you, Robin. I think you're from Belfast, so thank you. And I believe it's quite a huge topic right now in Belfast because, as you may know, we've seen riots in Northern Ireland regarding migration issue. So thank you for attending. The conservative governments in Europe have put pressure on the judges of the European Court of Human Rights to interpret the European Convention on Human Rights in a manner less sympathetic to the human rights of asylum seekers. Given the rights embodied in the ECHR apply to all citizens of Europe, denizens of Europe, not just citizens, could cases be taken to the court which might challenge the compatibility of provisions in the pact with Europe's human rights regime? Thank you for this question. Since we are quite in a legal field, maybe I could ask Silvia first.
Sure, certainly. So these declarations and this push from conservative governments, I would say, is definitely concerning. But for now, it remains a political pressure on the court. It does not change the fact that cases can be brought in front of the European Court of Human Rights. Of course, well, it's going to be difficult to do so in the sense that you always need an individual case to start. You need to have exhausted all the national remedies, meaning that, for example, if there is a violation in Greece, you first have to go through the whole judicial procedure in Greece to the highest possible court before you can even address the Court of Human Rights. So to have really landmark cases is going to take years, and that's an important consideration because in the meantime, violations will continue happening. But that is, of course, one avenue that can continue being used. Then whether the court will actually change its interpretation of the law also as a result of political pressure, that remains a question. We unfortunately don't have a crystal ball, but it will also be important to keep the counter pressure on them from academics, human rights defenders, to make sure that there are no attacks to the rule of law, especially, and in this case, when migrants are concerned creating a double standard as compared to EU citizens, for example.
Silvia was already mentioned, it's about the time. Now it's time consuming and exhausting for the person, but also for all the system and the civil society again, because a new system was created again. Also us as a civil society, we need to find emergency systems that we have to build to support the people that will gonna start these procedures.
And just a quick thing, something that we didn't mention already is that, of course, when we are talking about human beings, is not the most important, but how much money we are going to spend on this system, because it's something that we would like to see numbers. Because we are implementing these measures to make a safer Europe and also a richer Europe where people cannot take their jobs. But I would like to see how much money we are going to invest to create this system. So I think it's something to take. And for all the Europeans, it's interesting to know how much it's going to be.
Do you have maybe an idea, all of you, of actually like the spending, like how many we are going to put in this pact? Because as you say, it's a good question. What does it represent?
I can try to answer, but this is really the question, I would say, in the sense that I think it's impossible to quantify the cost of the pact, especially if we look at the global level. There are some figures that have been provided by the institutions in terms of how much the EU will be contributing to the pact implementation. But of course, I mean, member states also have to fund it from their national budgets in part. For instance, the European Commission, when there was the past midterm revision of the MFF in 24, made available 2 additional billion euros for the member states for pact implementation. But then now there is also the negotiations on the new budget that are ongoing, and the new budget will come into force in 28. So when the pact implementation, of course, will still be, let's say, at its peak. And there has been a proposal of a total of 81 billion euros for asylum, migration, and border management. So it's not only the pact, but of course, a lot of these elements are contained in the pact. The Commission has presented this as a tripling of the current resources, but of course, we are looking at resources that are allocated at the EU level, and it's also not very clear how much of this money will go into border management and how much will go in the protection and safeguards elements. It should also be part of the pact.
We know that Spain has taken a different route when it comes to migration of sorts. Do you think that your country opposed the pact and or the return directive? And then more broadly, like, which member states really opposed the pact and the new update of the return directive, if there are still member states opposing it?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I can mention the words of the Interior Minister, Fernando Grande Marlaska, that after the implementation of the pact, he said that they welcome the pact, but they will implement it with a rights-based and respectful approach that we would like to see how is going to be that. What is a clear opposition from the government is regarding the detention centers in third countries. They say that they reiterate the government opposition to the creation. They say that they will not contribute to that. But to the other points, there's this idea that some common tool for every country to implement the procedure is good. That in paper, of course, as a European group is okay, but the words regarding these third countries is what they send the message that there is this opposition.
Thank you, Lola. Daniela, would you like to add something, maybe?
Yeah, of course. What I think it's relevant is the fact that even if some specific politicians raised specific points and specific maybe ideas against this pact, in fact, in the moment of voting the new regulations, we saw that the reality is what it is. So unfortunately, we saw that again the civil society and the politicians that are more close to the civil society, they didn't have enough power in the European Council and Parliament in the moment of voting.
Yeah, thank you, Daniela. But now that the pact has been voted, could civil society organizations bring a case before a supranational body in order to challenge some aspects of the pact and the detention of individuals in return hubs, for example, or other aspects?
Yes, I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, it's not only the European Court of Human Rights, but then specifically at the EU level, there is the European Court of Justice that can play a role. But I think the challenge is always the same, that there is no direct access to the courts as such, especially with the Court of Justice. You need a national court to address the question to the Court of Justice. And there will certainly be elements around detention, around the externalization parts, both of the pact and the return regulation that can be challenged, but it will take the right case to be able to also leverage the court's intervention. So I'm certain that it will be the case, and that maybe in 4 or 5 years, we will start seeing cases going to the higher levels. But in the meantime, there could be other ways for civil society to complain. For example, there are several mechanisms at the UN level that are not as binding as courts, but that have an authoritative interpretation of what international human rights law would mean. So that could also be another avenue. But again, litigation is definitely effective, but takes time, takes resources. So will be one of the different pathways we can try to take to challenge the violations.
Yeah, I just want to add what we already mentioned before, the monitoring and the documentation. This is what civil society can do, can start monitoring already, can document already, and of course we can move also into a more public accountability. In different countries, there will be, especially next year, a change of the government, and there the civil society could also kind of play a good role, not to change the pact because we know that is already done, but at least to change national regulations and national laws that will gonna be implemented in the next months.
Yeah, there's something quick to add. In the case of Spain, if we rely on the party that is in the government, for instance, next year there will be some elections in Spain. This scenario that is still in paper looks like different. Even some things are very similar, I think, in all the countries, but at least in paper they look different. They could also change. So this is why it's very important to protect really this idea of treating people as human beings, because if not, if we rely on the party that is ruling the country, it can be very dangerous how it's implemented, just that.
Yes, very good point. I will ask one last question before we open the mics. We have other questions just in case, but I think it'd be nice to take your questions, our audience. You've already mentioned the similarities with some comparison with of this new policy framework with the ICE style migration management system in the US. Are the two similar, and is the comparison valid according to you? Lola, do you want to maybe carry on?
Oh, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah,
Because-
just
yeah,
is there,
sorry.
can one compare the European Pact with what's going on with the ICE American migration management system?
I think it's an aspect of this narrative of deterrence that we already spoke with. I think is very similar. I think some image that we saw about this brutality of treating children like offenders, I think we are not at this point, but still there are many things happen that we see different when they are happening in the US and in Europe. We can think, for instance, the children that stayed in the forest between Belarus and Poland for months. We don't consider this like is happening in other countries, but still, and probably Silvia regarding laws where you can see some differences, but I really see that this narrative is very similar.
Yeah, what I want to add is, of course, in both the situation, the European one and the USA, there is a political disillusion and fake promotion of fake real consequences on the political side, because the big narration is about like people coming and invading Europe and America, but what we know is, of course, that the numbers are saying something different, and these numbers and hundreds and thousands of researches were not were not took as like the based facts, and what is the evidence on this EU pact and the politics in the USA is that the numbers and the researches and the lives doesn't matter. What matters is more this political approach and this way of spreading fake problems, because in both situations, instead of speaking about the economical situation, about much more difficult situation that are really situations involving the majority of the people, the politicians and the parties, not just the right-wing parties, but even the liberals and even some left-wing parties, they want to put the people on the move as the center of the damage they are doing to the majority of the people. So it's more easy to find someone else to blame, and this someone else to blame, it's also a person coming from the same countries that previously USA and Europe colonized. So it's a spreaded imperialistic and neocolonialistic politics. So yes.
Thank you. Do you want to add something, Silvia?
Maybe very briefly, just to say we have been pushing for this comparison quite a lot because especially with the return regulation, we see some elements being introduced, such as these new investigative measures that will enable home rates for migration enforcement just on the basis of an administrative authorization rather than a full judicial evaluation and the real suspicion that there is. I mean, normally you send the police to someone's home if there is a criminal investigation. That's not for migration enforcement purposes. We're really, how can I say, meddling these two spheres in a way which is clearly discriminatory of people due to their migration status. And I think this is really the common element with ICE, that there are two tracks, one for citizens, one for migrants. But again, this is not what we want to see in society. And this is also a parallel that is not liked at all by decision makers, it's not liked by governments, because it actually does show the realities of what migration policies sometimes try to hide, so the real impact on people. But again, if we accept compromises on fundamental principles as the inviolability of homes, family life, then this is only the beginning of the kind of changes that we might see in our societies also more at large.
Thank you all for these very precious answers. I'm always very cautious about drawing comparisons between countries. It's very difficult to do. But despite that, we published an analysis a while ago that Raquel put in the chat. So thank you, Raquel. If you want to read a bit more about Europe and the United States of America, are they similar in terms of migration? As you say, it forces us to really look in the mirror and see what our policies really are and what are these effects. So yeah, thank you for that.
Adrian, I mentioned before the meeting, I think it's really important that we discuss the legal aspects, but also these weeks I had the opportunity to talk with some Syrians and Afghans in Europe, and I think it's very important to know also this picture that we are creating about people. I would like to read very briefly some of the words of Syrian young Taher that he arrived in 2015 to Germany. And today he's a doctor, he's a dentist. And he told me, if I personally were allowed to stay as a dentist while others who may still need protection are sent back, I would honestly feel uncomfortable and exploited. I also fear that even in the best case scenario, if not many people are actually deported, the issue will still be used as a political tool against refugees. It could be used to pressure or threaten them, leaving many people living in constant fear. And I think this idea of selective asylum is totally wrong because we are not considering people as people. And I think here is a problem in the narrative of all the parties. Some of the parties picture migration as a problem, other parties picture migration as a solution, because we really not picturing migration as people on the move. We are picturing as a tool, maybe for my party purpose or maybe for my economy. And as Taher said, I think this idea of selective asylum is very complicated.
Yes, it's a very good point. We often forget that these talking points that we repeat have impact on the societies we live in, and they have very, very real consequences for the people and the people who are trying to find a way here, but also the people who are living here.
In my experience, working in an organization in Italy that is a migration-led organization, this is I totally agree with what Lola was saying. there is the first migration, but there is the second side of the migration that is more related to the people and the real protagonism of the life of the people once they are living in the country. And for many years, and still now is like this, there is or a comparison that is a wrong comparison, because of course it's different to compare someone that is now on the move with someone that is already settled in the new country. So the experience of life is different. And there is a side of this narrative that is really making kind of a war between people with first migration background, second migration background. And this is something that is not good at all, because what is happening now is that a lot of second generation, third generations, because these politics are now more and more full of securitization, and it's something that is bringing also in specific countries, especially like Italy, more focus, because the security and the surveillance now that is also present in the pact, of course, has a real impact in the life also of the people that are already living in the country and has already maybe 10, 20, 30 years now. And this is something that is very dangerous, because of course always living as people with not really protagonists of the politics, not really protagonists of the choices that the politicians are making on our bodies and our lives, is creating a huge gap of participation, but also a huge gap of political involvement. And I think the effect is directly on the documents, directly on the fact that even if you're living in a country for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, the way to be a citizen is something that is not super easy. And at the end of the day, you will gonna be always a migrant, and you will always, the policies could always change, and you can, all your life could be impacted with last minute new decrees, as the security decrees we saw in Italy. So there is a very huge connections between the first the people that are moving now and the people that already are settled. And again, it's very important to be conscious as migrant that is living in this country, that we have to be united, and we have to understand how much we need to be active as a civil society to support the people that now are more vulnerable.
Maybe just say, Daniela has been extremely articulate on this. I fully agree that this is like the bigger picture and what we see. So really this lack of recognition that migration is not only, made of people seeking asylum. Migration is not only made of, let's say, new arrivals. It's made of many different dimensions. And unfortunately, most of them are completely neglected. And there is the big regular pathways, regular migration, missing piece of the conversation, that it's often not on the agenda, also due to a difference, of course, in the competence of the EU and of the member states. But unfortunately, I would say it's really a political question there, not so much a practical or based on evidence kind of way of addressing the phenomenon. But I would say that bringing the voices and the testimonies of those that live these policies, or also of people that have lived migration experience, continues being extremely relevant. But those that are really in positions of power, that are creating these policies, are definitely the ones that are farther away from this. And civil society can only do a certain amount of work to build bridges, let's say, especially at a time when there are attacks, defunding of the work of everyone who is actually out of the system, and the most critical voices, the grassroots, migrant-led, diaspora organizations, are certainly the most impacted and affected, and those that face most challenges to even be part of the conversation. So just this maybe as a conclusion as well, but indeed extremely important, and thanks to Daniela and Lola for raising this point.
Yes, thank you. Yes, it's a very big project because we are asked to sort of rethink the way we see migration, which is very difficult, not only, like, as you said, for civil society organizations, but for society in general. Hopefully we see some developments going this way.
So it's time to finish up now. So we are thanking everybody very much for attending and participating to this live event. And thank you very much as well, Lola, Daniela, and Silvia, for your contribution, very precious contribution, and for being with us today. Many thanks again to our supporters and shareholders who make this kind of event possible. So don't forget to subscribe if you're not already receiving it to our newsletter, a weekly newsletter. It's free, and you can also follow us on social networks. And if you can, please consider donating to support our work.
Thank you, and special thanks to the audience. I see that today we had people listening to us from Belfast all the way to Jordan. So it's great to see that this topic can bring people together despite the distance.